Hello, welcome to our 10-part workshop series called Everything Aurora. We are here in March 2021 amidst a global pandemic, and we hope to share with you some inspiration for living lightly on our beautiful planet Earth.
Hi, my name is Garrett, and I do chores here at Aurora Farm almost every morning. Today, I've joined my friend George and the rest of the herd inside their pen. The goats are pretty funny to be around, and there's almost never a dull moment with them. A funny story about George is he actually used to be considered Little George when he was younger, and Louise would actually have to take him to the farmer's market with her every week just so she could bottle feed him. This was necessary because George had two older siblings and they didn't really like to let him eat. I'm just glad that George is around the farm today. George is one of my favorite goats. He looks kind of scary, but once you get to know him, you realize he's just a big suck for attention and food.
Thank you everyone for joining me, both on YouTube and on Facebook Live. This is our first workshop in a series of 10 that we'll be hosting every Saturday at 2 p.m. thanks to the stay-at-home program. And we're very excited, I'm very excited to do this because I've been really missing giving workshops. So I used to, pre-COVID, give all kinds of workshops throughout the seasons and sort of varied them every season and tried to teach people basic skills that they could use to improve their wellness and learn how to make basic things and just basically help people move forward in whatever skills they wanted to learn. So today we're going to work on it's a great time in the midwinter to look at what our garden plan is going to be. So I'm going to run through some basics of garden planning and help you get on your way with the gardens. But I'm also going to share sort of what my winter pantry looks like and what it's giving to me right now, and do a little quick demo of how to use these winter veggies. So we've got, of course, all the winter root vegetables that are so abundant in our growing season and so easy to grow. So potatoes and carrots and parsnips and onions, those are all what I consider of the very, very easy to grow families. And we've also got some canned tomato sauce that I'm going to throw in. I've got some dried kale, and I've got some dried hot peppers. So those are all going to be sort of the basis of a stew that you could put all kinds of different things into. I'm also going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite lentils, which is grown on the prairies, these French Green Lentils. And they are just a very small lentil, but they are packed with protein. And so when you put them in together with all these vegetables, it just makes a really good meal for any purpose. And of course, at this time of year, if you don't have a slow cooker, or if you have one, but it's in the basement in a box, now's a good time to get it out. And as some of the secondhand stores are starting to reopen a bit, these are excellent finds and almost nothing can go wrong with them. So if there's one in a secondhand store, it's just because the person really wasn't using them or didn't want it. So you can often find them very economically in a secondhand situation. So the idea of the slow cooker is, of course, that you can just throw everything in. It cooks at a very low temperature, which is great for all the flavors to mix and all the nutrients to stay in the foods as much as possible. and really just a very, easy way to make it quite a large volume. And don't shy away from making these big volumes of food, even if it's just yourself or a couple people, because that one labor of making that food will end up giving you many meals, and you can always throw it into the freezer. Okay, so we're just going to take that lid off. I've got it about half full of water, and really all it is throwing all of these wonderful foods into it, just kind of chopped about the same size, and over a course of about 6 to 8 hours, we are going to end up with a full pot of vegetable stew. And I personally don't season it too much before the fact, because I like to let all of those simmer and get their own flavors into it, and then I taste test it to decide, even for salt and pepper. And I'm going to make this one a little bit tomato based, so I'm just going to throw a can of that was tomato paste that I had made from our summer tomatoes. So you can see that you can end up with a whole crock of that, and turn it on. And really, it's as simple as that. So, it takes the period of time. Maybe that took me about 15-20 minutes to peel and chop all of that and get that into there. But it's all really, really ready to go. So all of those root vegetables that I just showed you, they can all be stored in a bin in your basement in a cool, dark place. And so those are things that you can grow in your garden in larger quantities that don't require a huge amount of space. The kale, which is just an absolute superfood, as we all know, but many people don't know that you can dry it out. So drying out your kale, of course, if you have a small dehydrator, it's very easy, but you can even do it on a very low heat in your oven if you need to. And that really compresses it. You can end up with big jars of dried kale that are just very easy to throw into all of your different stews and soups and what have you. So that's a really good way to get to the place where you have all of those foods ready to go. So all the labor that we're going to put into our gardens throughout the growing season can really reduce our labor of making and preparing food through those winter months. So you can kind of think of that as a seasonal thing. And really, when we go to the grocery stores right now, it's as though we live in a temperate climate that that has 4 growing seasons a year, and we can have all of these foods available to us. Whereas really, if we start eating in patterns of the seasons, then it gives you a lot of variety, because generally we're not going to eat those root vegetables as much through the summer, because you're waiting for the potatoes to grow and the carrots and so on. So if you think of trying to get your eating into the seasons that we have here in the prairies and eating those foods in season, the foods that are in season right now are all of those root vegetables, your squashes, and then whatever you have dried and preserved or frozen, those are them. So here I'm also just showing, there's asparagus canned, here is zucchini canned, here are onions canned, and so those become sort of the staples. You're just grabbing and working with all of those foods. Now you might say, well, what about some greens in the middle? I need my lettuce, or I need my green crops. So that's where I wanted to bring in this again. The French lentils are an awesome seed to sprout, and I'm going to just quickly show you kind of the 3 stages of sprouting. So what a sprout is just a small plant, a very small plant. So that French green lentil, this is just the lentil itself in water rehydrating. Okay, so it starts out as just a dried lentil, and then day 3 it's going to have some little sprouts in it. So I'm just going to try to hold those out. They have just the little cotyledon, the first little root. That's what they have on day 2 or 3. And then after about a week, you've got this beautiful, look at that jar, it's all full of green, this beautiful green sprouted mass. And you just plop that in with anything that you're cooking, and you can, or just throw it on the cooked food, or throw it in just kind of at the last moment if you want to even cook it, or just eat it plain like that. So you can be sprouting, and this is only a couple of months, right? We're only going to be doing this phase of eating, say from December, January, February. We could start getting into little microgreens throughout that time. And then soon enough, we're going to be getting into our whole, first crops in the garden. So when you think about that kind of cycle, then it makes it easier to, to not purchase those foods in the grocery store that really are lacking in flavor for sure, and lacking in nutritional value. And they've come many, many, many food miles to get here, and just all of that kind of pales in comparison to the wealth of goodness that we have in our food supply that is easily available. So that's my little pep talk for gardening when you're thinking about your gardening in February, at the beginning of February, which is exactly the time that we need to. And this year is a little bit different, because I've noticed, and I had heard, and I've certainly noticed in, ordering my seeds now. So I've been ordering seeds since kind of January 1st. I start getting into seed ordering. That's, after I go through my planning stage. So today we're going to kind of fast track that and go through a planning stage, and then a getting ready to seed purchase stage. And then you'll be ready to, once you have that done, then you're ready to think about which plants you need to start inside. And throughout the 10 weeks of this workshop, I am going to go through all of those stages, and we will follow along in my little greenhouse how our planning is going for our market gardens, and how you can move those ideas into your smaller gardens, okay? So I just wanted to start out with showing this beautiful baby. So anybody who has grown zucchini has grown one of these. And you might say to yourself when this happens, these aren't the best to eat when they get this big. But look, it's February and it's just in perfect shape. So, there is something to be said for these large ones. They're not as good in taste, but what I do save these for is, I'm just going to show you quickly by giving it a little score line here and popping that open. So what's going to happen in here is that I'm going to get all of this moist food for our chickens. So I hang on to these. I've got a couple of big bins of these huge zucchinis, and I just wait until about this time of year, and then we start cutting them open and feeding them to our chickens. So this is a really good food source, easy to grow, fresh, live food that I can supplement my chickens' otherwise pretty dry food at this time of year, and they just love it. So when you think of that, this is all good flesh that we still could be eating ourselves too. And they do store very, very well. So I've got a couple of other squashes here that we know, the vegetable squash, vegetable spaghetti, and it's a squash that has a spaghetti-like texture. And I've got a couple cooking. I'm going to pull one out and show you how to do that. And then, of course, butternut, butternut squash, the flavor of butternut is just so lovely, and so many dishes and soups and so on are prepared with this. It has a very hard outer shell, okay? So does the spaghetti squash. So the squashes that are in the families that have the harder shells, those are going to be better winter keepers. So these, again, you just have them in a bin, a closed tight bin in a cool spot in your basement with no light, and they will really keep almost all winter. So these are so easy to grow. And as I just had opened one of these vegetable squashes to vegetable spaghettis to put them into the oven to cook, I also pulled out the seeds. So we're going to just take out the seeds before we cook them. But then you've got all these seeds. Now, like every one of those seeds is your next year's growth plant. So while you're starting to think about purchasing seeds, I want you to think about also how easy it is to save those seeds. And some plants are much, much easier than others. And in a year like this year where we've already seen that a lot of the seeds are starting to sell out. So that's why I want to get you all into the point by the end of this workshop and over the course of the weekend where you have your design ready, you have your list of seeds ready, and you're able to order them. And I highly encourage you to order them this weekend. Okay, so make that your goal, to make your commitment to your garden and to make that available. And Marnie, I see the top of your question. If you bought the squash at a grocery store, can you use the seeds? Yes, absolutely. I would pre-sprout some of them to make sure. And this will come up, well, I may as well talk about it right now. So this is one of the points that I want to talk about. When you're looking at seeds in a catalog, sometimes they say hybrid and sometimes they don't say hybrid. So a hybrid plant has been bred to the point where, it produces a reliable and often, has characteristics that people love. And so people like those hybrids, but they do not reproduce. So let's say you had a hybrid corn and you had that seed, you might plant it, you might get a corn stalk from it, but it doesn't produce the corn, or it produces a corn of, bad quality or what have you. So, whereas technically you could, if you know it's an organic squash, then I would say yes, very likely it's not a hybrid. But if you don't know what it is, then I would stick for now with the purchased seeds. So you can often get them, they're usually in the heritage categories, or heritage seeds. That just means it's a seed that was developed over centuries by specific farms at specific locations with qualities that match that environment. And so they tend to be more reliable, and we know how they're going to perform in our environment, etc. So it would be better to just stick with that. But once you get there, and you can seed save, like these seeds are very moist right now, and so what you need to do so that they don't end up molding is that you need to just pull off all of this kind of goopy stuff with it. And then you need to lay them out on just a paper towel on a plate and let them just air dry. And you can kind of, make sure you're moving them around so they don't stick to one another. It doesn't take very long to air dry them. And once they're air dried, then you can put them just into an envelope. Because if you put them into a jar that's a sealed lid, it might be that you get some molding in it because they weren't completely dry. If you put them in an envelope, they still have that, that air permeability that will allow them to continue to dry a little bit. So that's a little thing about, forward thinking seed saving. So now I'm just going to shift gears a little bit, although I just need to wipe my hands off from that because I want to run through quickly a couple different styles of plantings, and I've just drawn up a few diagrams to make it easier to talk. So very traditionally Aboriginal design in this area is called the Three Sisters, and those Three Sisters are corn, bean, and squash. These are mounds of earth where all three of those plants are planted each mound, and they have the characteristics of being able to be kind of mutually supportive. So the corn grows as the tall sisters in the middle, and the beans, these are beans that are climbing beans, vining beans. They use the structure of the corn to climb up, and then the squashes, and Ainsley's just going to show you a quick picture of what that looks like. And the squash are going to be ground cover, and they're going to cover all of the area beneath that tall plant. And so they're going to also kind of make a ground cover to prevent the other weeds from coming up, to maintain the soil, maintain the humidity in the soil so you don't have black earth there. And the beans have, they're called nitrogen fixers, which means they take the nitrogen from the air and they ground it and make it bioavailable to those plants that are heavy feeders like the corn. And so and then the corn shades the squash, because the squash don't like to have too much full sun. They prefer a little partial shade, especially in the heat of the day. So they then shade that base of the squash. So this is a really great, if you know you're going to plant these 3 plants in your garden, then dedicate one little area to the 3 sisters. And that's a very flexible way. You can put those mounds together in any way you want. And then you can plan on planting those in succession. So you want to plant the corn first, so they have a chance to come up a little bit. Then you're going to plant the beans so that they start coming up at that same time. And the squash really like to start in warmer soil. So they're going to come in last, and then you're going to plant them into that mound. Okay, so then moving on from there, the next one that is very popular and really a great place to start is called the square foot garden. So in square foot gardening, this was, came out as a book. You can purchase the Square Foot Garden book, but there's a lot of information about it online. And the basic idea is it's a 4 foot by 4 foot square. And then within that, you subdivide that and you make plots that are, however, so this this would be foot by a foot. This would be less, 6 inches by 6 inches, and so on. So you can put those, you can put those plants that the spacing of them, and every plant has a spacing requirement, and that you'll always find that on the back of the seed package. So you can really design your whole garden by putting different plants together. And this gives you that option to you're always able to reach into the middle of that 4 foot square. So that concept, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but just kind of historically to give the background of that concept came from what was called the French intensive. So in France, they had this style of planting, which was long, wide rows. So it's like a square foot garden, but a long one. And so you would see those still to this day. This is the typical way that the French peasantry grew their gardens. And often these were raised boxes, but they really focused on interplanting. So I'm going to show you now. Ainsley, do you have that slide of the interplantings?
Yeah, companion.
Yeah, companion plantings. So this brings forward the concept of companion plants. So companion plants, as it would sound, are plants that go well together. And so if you can keep some really, really basic principles on companion plantings going, then you can see how they will benefit each other. And so in this one, they give the example of tomato, basil, garlic, parsley as in good friends. And you can see how one of the concepts of companion plants is that tomato plant is growing big and tall. All of its energy is up top. The basil is short, and basil and parsley are short, and they like a bit of shade. And then the garlic is in the ground. So its whole, everything that's happening for the garlic is underground. So when you kind of work your tiers of your garden by designing it so that these plants are going together in that kind of way, then they work well together. So there's a book called Tomatoes Love Carrots, and that book really gives you the whole chart of what plants like each other. Now, not to get too you can become very obsessed with these kind of organizations. But it is good to know just a couple of really basics. I mean, you don't want to waste your whole time. Like, we know that peas and onions, anything from the onion family, it really deters peas from growing and flowering and having their, so you just don't want to put them right next to each other. So it just being able to know a few of those tricks are really important. So are you going back to, okay, so maybe I'll just go back to saying one more kind of evolution of that square foot garden came from the permaculture, where they said, well, let's not do it as squares. Let's do it as hexagons, because hexagons have a more efficient space use. And as you can see, you can cluster them however you want, so you can really fit them all around, which you can do with the square foot garden too. But there is a more of an efficiency through these. So, and these ones, let's say some of them could be flat on the ground, some of them could be raised a foot, some of them could be raised 3 foot. So you could make a whole structure of, you know, how you want these plots to be going together based on your own personal needs. Okay, and then I'm just going to show one more design that I love, and I'm going to build one this summer now. Again, I've built a few of these in various places, but it's the spiral, and often they're herb gardens, but a spiral garden is where you have a walking path that goes in a spiral so that you can reach every area, even sort of back corners of them. So as long as this space is not more than, you know, 2 feet, then you can reach everywhere in it, and you can cluster your plants all the way through. So you can make this whole square pretty much a growing, living, productive space that you can still get through, and then you have this beautiful, you know, archetypal form of the spiral to get you there. So that's one of my favorites. So now, given all of these kind of structures of how you can grow your garden, then you know, it's important to go out and decide what you're going to use. If you already have an existing garden, then you can take that exact shape and maybe rethink it a little bit in terms of how you might be able to plant plants closer together, or in companion clusters that will be more beneficial to one another, or even starting a new garden. Then you can think, well, how could you then be able to put those, you know, plants together in what shape? And oftentimes these are purely personal. So just what your personality type is. Some people love the square foot gardening because it's so rigid and organized, and that's great for their minds. Other people love the spiral garden, where you can really plant anything however you want it, as long as you kind of obey those basic rules of what plants don't like one another. And also just remembering to always structure it on the north-south angle. So if you're organizing your garden to have rows, they need to be running east-west, so that if this is south, that sun is hitting those crops that are at the south end, and then they get taller and taller, so that you don't have the sun shading. Those tall plants have to be in the back, so that they're not shading those smaller plants. So if you can think of your garden on that kind of arc or whatever height differential, so you know, your corn and trellis tomatoes and, you know, taller plants like that, and then down to your zucchinis, then down to your smaller things, and down to your radishes, and then down to your cucumbers that are right on the floor of the garden. That's how you want to structure that kind of typical, or whatever way you decide to make the overall layout. You just want to make sure you have that height going. I'm going to just take a little quick moment. Ainsley, if you could give me the tomato slide. I just want to talk a tiny bit about the tomato, because as you're ordering your seeds, there is one really important thing to take into consideration, which is that there are 2 kinds of tomatoes, okay? Indeterminate and determinate. And when you look at the seed package, it's going to tell you which one it is. And if it doesn't, then you want to maybe think about not buying those ones, because you need to know whether it's indeterminate or determinate. And you can see exactly what the difference is. The indeterminate one, which tend to be, that was the classic heritage one, has that long single stalk that has to be tied up to a stick. So if you think that every single tomato needs to be staked, that's not true, because then, it was over time that the determinate tomatoes had evolved through breeding, plant breeding. We're not talking GMO, we're just talking good old-fashioned plant breeding to be bush tomatoes. So sometimes they're just called bush tomatoes because they grow in a bush. And they, generally speaking, don't require support. Some people put them in those little cages, the 3-ring cages, and that does help hold them up if some of the branches get really heavily laden with tomatoes. But if you don't stake the indeterminate varieties, they're vines. They will simply lay down on the ground. And some people grow them like this in the field, but you have to then put a really heavy straw mulch or something down on them, or else you're prone to getting a lot of diseases from the soil, or even just rotting from the soil on heavy rains and so on. So it's much more important to do that. You can get a higher yield from the determinate ones sometimes, indeterminate, but you also need to prune them much more carefully. And pruning tomatoes is a whole other little workshop. We're going to talk about tomatoes a lot. I just wanted to say, I've got some indoor tomatoes. This little bowl of goodness came from my greenhouse right now. So I've got some tomatoes ripening. I've got some celery, some of this beautiful little red veined sorrel, some parsley, just some of the plants that I brought in, and I'm bringing through the winter just for my own self. And how wonderful it is to have a couple really good tomatoes right in the middle of the winter. But also that we can take a cutting off of a tomato and grow it. So I've got just a little cutting from my tomato plant, and you can see all of these beautiful big roots coming out of it. And even this one, I don't know if you can see that, it has a little flower bud. It's just like really wants to make a tomato. So that's really fun to think about those tomatoes. And tomatoes are something that just pretty much everybody wants to grow in their gardens. So you have to remember that they're very heavy feeders. They require a lot of nutrients in the ground to grow them. So if you've got, if you're thinking about just putting kind of a blanket covering of compost or bone meal or blood meal or some kind of natural fertilizer onto your gardens in the spring, it's much better to be strategic about it. So if you know which plants are your heavy feeders and which plants are your light feeders, then we're going to, deal with those nutrient requirements in the soil just immediately at the base of that plant. So when I'm going to plant that plant, I'm going to decide how much compost needs to go in right to that root base of that. And we're going to get into that more as we get closer to our end of March and April, when we start getting our plants really ready to go out. So we will be over the course of this 10 weeks, we will be planting all of our bedding plants. And just to let you know, these seeds that this is how I start my seeds. I have a whole little box of zip bags with I'm just going to try to find this is the very first things that I'm starting. So all of my peppers, and it's a tad early, so don't take what I'm doing as being sort of what you have to be doing. But what I do is I like to start my plants in just some paper towel, and I just like to have them wet, and then I put my seeds down. Sorry, this is a little bit sticky here. And then I just am looking at those seeds, and I don't know if you can see that properly. These ones are already just ready to sprout. So as soon as they've sprouted, then I know that I can put them into their bedding plant, and I just monitor them carefully. Now, I don't do it that precisely for all of them, but for these early growers, and especially like pepper seeds, I'm trying to do a bunch of different kinds of peppers this year because I just love that, and they sell well and everybody likes them. So pepper seeds, if you want the purple and the orange and yellow and all those specialty heritage ones, those seeds tend to be quite expensive. So I like to pre-sprout them first so that I know that they have sprouted and that I can just carefully plant each ones. Now, some other seeds you absolutely do not have to do that with, and we'll go through that as we go. So right now I've got a couple of sages, I've got all of my peppers, I've got a echinacea I've got a big seedling of asparagus, because I've got some asparagus, but I need to, I want to grow now a much bigger one. Can I get you to let someone into the meeting, Ainsley?
Yeah.
There's a new person that's just coming in. So, so those are the ones that I'm just starting right now. So these are almost ready to be planted. I will be putting them into the greenhouse to start, and they will go under lights. So we will next time do a quick little tour of the greenhouse. I've got some sprouts coming up, some microgreens coming up, and I will have these little ones in there under lights, and then I've got my plants that have come in from the garden. So we're going to work on that. If you would like to start one plant early, I would highly recommend a very special plant, obviously special to our local Indigenous community, is tobacco. And anyone who practices Indigenous ceremonies knows that tobacco is the main offering. And I love to plant it for that reason. I grow a lot of it and I have it to give away. But I also grow it because it is a fantastic natural pest deterrent in the garden. So I plant, it all throughout the gardens, and sometimes even last year I made a proper fence. Like I made a fence all the way around one of my main gardens, and it was the best. It was the most protected my gardens have ever been. So this is what the seed head looks like. And so I brought in a lot of it. And then when you pop that little ball open, just gonna pop that open, you can see that all these tiny, tiny seeds come out. And so those seeds are each gonna grow into a big tobacco plant. And I have a lot of these seeds here. So anybody that's come to this workshop, I'm always happy to give away this seed. This seed was given to me about 15 years ago. It was told to me that it was called 1,000-year tobacco as the variety, and I've been growing it ever since and seed saving. Well, this one's very easy to seed save, but because it grows as such a tiny little plant at first, it will self-seed if you're careful, but I always like to grow some of it from seed. So I am happy to share and give away all of these seeds. And last year I had such a big, such a big crop of it that I was able to save a lot of the leaf matter, and I have a big box of this seed. So anybody who would like this seed, I'm happy to give it to you. Just please email us, and we'll arrange a time for you to drop by and pick it up from our contact list pickup table. Okay?
Maria's just mentioning that tobacco is part of the Seven Sisters. If you want to mention that.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. I mentioned that there is in Aboriginal culture a larger called Seven Sisters, and the Seven Sisters are the squash, beans, corn, but then it's also sunflowers, Jerusalem artichoke, tobacco, and then the seventh one is the human, the planter. So that is sort of another iteration of how that Indigenous planting happened here many, many years ago. And I've heard people, elders, say that they could do huge tracts of land, like 50 acres and so on, all by hand, and these hugely productive gardens in the prairies at those times. So that gives us courage to think that we can garden too as well. So there are other plants that deter pests, and we'll get into those too, marigolds. So we can go that. So if you get to a point where you have a garden plan and you would like my feedback, you can just send me an email and scan your drawing, or give me a screenshot of your drawings, and I can give you some feedback. Or if you have some specific questions, just please put them in the chat box or in the comments section, and we will help you out with your garden. Okay, so that being said, I think I'm just going to take a quick look at I've got my vegetable spaghetti here, and I wanted to show you how to do your vegetable spaghetti. So I'm just going to take a quick moment to grab my spaghetti out and see how it looks. Oh yeah, it looks done. So, for those of you who haven't had vegetable spaghetti before, or had it and wondered what you do with it, it just comes off in these beautiful kind of stringy, long stringy pieces that pretty much look like spaghetti. So you can just scrape that all out and then put a tomato sauce or a cream mushroom sauce or whatever it is that you like. You can put that on as your sauce for it. So that's a really great squash. We have a bunch of these squashes, both the butternut and the vegetable spaghetti, in our store, our online store, so you can get some of those from us, as well as the French lentils if you want to try some of these out. I've got a few seed catalogs, so we talked about how to purchase your seeds. And of course, as much as I don't like paper things coming in the mail, I think the seed catalogs are going to be the last holdout for me, because I seem to be old-fashioned, where I would much prefer to look at, when I'm looking at these, I'm reading every page, and every page has, a big description and pictures and so on. And, it's a real joy for me to get these in December or early January and then be able to flip through them all. So I've put in the comments, or Ainsley, I think, posted in the comments that some of the my favorite seeds. Yeah, okay, so if everyone can see that. But the one, Richter's, I'm just going to talk about for a quick moment, is a seed company from Ontario. And they have they are a herb. They do have a vegetable section, but they really are renowned for their herb seeds. And so medicinal herbs, culinary herbs, all kinds. Every year they're coming out with all kinds of different ones. I don't know even where they're finding them all. But I always learn a lot just from reading through the seed catalog and from deciding which varieties I'm going to try this year and so on. So that's a really good one to see. The other one, which is a local company, is TNT Seeds. They're located in Headingley, and they really have an awesome collection of a lot of vegetables. They're very much into vegetables. They do sell a lot of hybrids. You kind of have to watch for that. But they also have a lot of heritage seeds. So you can go through, so even if you want to simplify and just go through one seed supplier, then I would recommend going through the TNT Seeds. Of course, you can, right now we're in COVID, so less likely to go and stand in front of a seed display at a store. Those are kind of, I always liken it to, the old adage, don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry. Same kind of thing. Don't go seed shopping when you're, wildly thinking about your garden. Go seed shopping once you've designed your garden and figured out what the spacing is of the plants, decided how many plants you can put in there, and that will tell you how many seeds you can put in. And much as we would love to try every single different variety of everything, sometimes it's best to just pick one or two and know sort of why you're picking them. And you can pick a different one for the next year. And if you're thinking about this as being a permanent thing that you're going to do every single year of your life, then you've got, presumably a lot of time to try out all these different things. So seeds do last, especially if you store them, again, in a cool, dry place. You can stick your seeds into a mason jar with a lid on it and put them away for the rest of the year if you don't use them all. So they will start to degrade, but usually that takes a couple of years. And you can always pre-test them out by doing the sprouting method, which I just showed you in the little baggies. You can pre-sprout a few seeds in, say, December to know what your seed rate, germination rate is, and then you can still plant those older seeds. So don't feel like you have to never throw out seeds if you're not using them all. And try to plant more or less the number of seeds that you want, giving yourself maybe a half failure rate so that you don't overplant. And if you have a sunny window or possibly a small greenhouse, or even if you'd like to set up a light stand, I'm going to show you that next week, how you can set up your own light stand and grow, a certain number of things. So, the things that you have to grow early are definitely your peppers, your tomatoes, some of the perennials that you might want to choose. You might choose to do those. Of course, you can get them all from a greenhouse. Most of these companies, have been ever since COVID, offering a contactless pickup. A place like TNT Seeds have been mail ordering seeds for eons. They've always been a mail order company, probably more so than go to the shelf and buy your seeds. So if you're going shopping for seeds, try to go with an actual list. And right now, I know that TNT Seeds just reopened, but they have, a shortened number of people, like they only allow a certain number of people in. And they don't let you just pick off the shelf anymore anyway. So I think this is a good time for us to train ourselves to do it the right way, which is design your garden, make your seed list, order your seeds. I've been really enjoying, I've spent a lot of time in the last little while doing something I don't usually have time to do, but suddenly with COVID, I seem to have a bunch of time to do it. And which is to investigate all kinds of other seed companies across Canada. And I have ordered just something from just about every one of them in early January, and now I've got them all because they all have something different and interesting, and seed shopping, looking back and forth between these different companies. And I want to point out one that's on the list that I really love, which is Rainbow Seeds. And if you're thinking about trying some microgreens over the next couple weeks and while you're getting ready for your garden, they have a microgreen package, 12 different types of seeds for $20, and they also have a $50 variety, so more seeds. But you can try out 12 different microgreens for $20. And really nice collection and really fun way to do some planting and have a little garden growing right now. Microgreens are awesome because they don't require so much light or nutrients or anything, because you're only growing them to about 3 or 4 inches tall, and then you're eating them. So within 3 or 4 weeks, you can have some greens to put on your table if you're getting antsy for more salads and so on. So I think those are the main things that I wanted to cover, and I'm just wondering, wanted to give like a quick moment to see if anybody else has any questions, or if anyone would like to unmute themselves and have a little back and forth with me about their gardens. You can ask me very specific questions about your gardens. I'm not sure, Ainsley, do you need to unmute people, or?
No, you should be able to.
Everybody can unmute themselves.
I think so.
And yeah, I'd love to spend the last little bit of time hearing from you. So what are you all thinking? I know my sister Anne is here, not to put you on the spot, Anne, but Anne has a lovely little garden. And by the way, I am one of 3 sisters, so I like that. And I'm not sure, Anne, if you would like to share any of your garden thoughts, or anyone else who is here.
Yeah. It's also on Zoom, just for the Facebook people.
And if there's anybody on the Facebook group that wants to post anything or questions, please do
There's
so.
been some comments we'll reply to after. Thank you,
Okay.
guys.
Hi. So yeah, it's Anne. Thanks, Louise. You're certainly an inspiration to me too. Except it's just that my space is really different, so I had to really adapt to using it. And I don't always keep up with the weeds, so that's a bit of a problem. My goal this coming year is to be, this year, is to be better with mulching so as to not get overwhelmed with weeds. That's a real problem, between maybe not having composted the manure I use long enough, and also initially I got topsoil at one point, and I found out that's a terrible idea because it was full of weeds.
Oh, that's too bad.
Like a commercially available, like a truckload of it.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to learn that lesson the hard way, and then I don't always keep up with the weeds. So to me, that's a bit of a challenge. However, I love saving seeds and starting my own plants from my own seeds. That's somehow even more gratifying. So thank you,
Awesome.
Louise.
You're welcome. Yeah. Well, I'll say one thing, Anne, in thinking about this summer, even last year we saw a huge uptick in people wanting to garden because of the pandemic, and I think we're seeing that even more. So I ordered many more bales, small square bales of straw, because sometimes people request them, ask me if they can buy them, and sometimes by the end of the year I'm starting to feel a little bit nervous about how much straw I have left. So this past year I had ordered 700 small squares bales, so I have a bunch that I will be making available, so I'll definitely keep you in mind. Straw's a really nice, cheap, easy to use mulch, and easy to it just decomposes right back into your garden. So I love using straw. I use it all over in my gardens, and so it's a really nice way to mulch. That's great. Hey Marnie, maybe I'll put you on the spot, and I'm not sure whether you're planning on doing your big garden again, but we, just so everyone knows, we had cultivated our back end of our field last year, and opened it up for people to rent larger plots of garden space. And this year, of course, now we're going to be doing that permanently. And so we're really excited to have, Marnie is one of the people who did have a garden there. And I know was that the biggest garden you've ever gardened, Marnie?
Yeah.
And I know you struggled a bit with it, but you did end up with a lot of food, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. We got food, and we had all sorts of problems. So I think I learned a lot. And I did it with my uncle, but he kind of quit coming after about halfway through the summer. So then I was just out there trying it myself and trying to keep the weeds down, and that was really impossible. So they just grew alongside the plants, and I just kept them away from our food.
Yeah.
But, it was really good. It was really hard. I think this year I'm going to stay close to home.
Okay.
And look, then it'll be my garden too.
Yeah.
That was with my uncle. I was following him, and I want to try my own things this year. So
nice, right on. Yeah, and that's another. I mean, weeds can be your friends, and in that they actually provide sort of a mulch of their own, in the sense that they are taking up that space in between plants. Like, you don't want them to squeeze out your plants, so that was exactly what you were doing, was keeping them away from your plants. But they can work in a good way, in that they don't allow for that bare soil to be open, exposed, and just evaporating the water. Sometimes they can help for pests as well, by creating sort of like I mean, an ecosystem always wants to just fill itself, right? It just wants to be completely full. So that's what you're trying to manage, is an ecosystem. But yeah, that's great.
Maria on Facebook's asking if you've ever used living mulches.
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, so the question is, do we ever use living mulch? And so that's, what we call living mulch or green manure crops is when you strategically plant all of those areas in between your plants with crops that are going to add a green manure, which is a manure coming from living plants, into that area, which then becomes a nutrient boost for the whole area. And a lot of people use things like rye or buckwheat or some of those field crops. Even oats makes a really nice cover crop that you can then till in or just turn in, and or even in some cases you could harvest as a small grain crop. So you could consider your garden as being a completely full ecosystem that you are going to, step on some plants in those pathways, but that you are going to, create a completely covered green space. And that is a good way to go as well. So was there, so that's on Facebook, was there something that you were thinking about using this year? Or is there any other comments?
Bonita says, I call that a ground cover, and then you dig them in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, ground cover too. So those are, and you can buy those seeds. Most seed companies now have them as they call them either green manure crops or ground cover crops. And you can get those seeds in large volumes where you can just kind of hand sow them loosely and rake them in onto your pathways or so on.
Maria says clover is a good nitrogen fixer.
Yes, clover is an awesome nitrogen fixer. Thank you, Maria. Are there any other? We're just about at
Basically
2 o'clock.
3, yeah.
3 o'clock. So that was great. Thank you all for joining. Again, a reminder that if you'd like tobacco seeds, I have them for you. If you'd like to run your garden plan over to me, we can look at that. If you'd like to post it for others to learn too, if you post it and tag us, we can have a dialogue about it open, which might help other people to do their gardening. And if you have resources or ideas to share about varieties or types of plants that you've loved, we would love to hear about that as well. So,
Anne did mention in the comments.
Anne says, best squash I've grown is Hubbard. Yes, sort of like a pumpkin, but a lot more flavor and keeps better. I save seeds every year. If anyone wants a few, I can share some. That's great. Thank you, Anne. I'd love to try some of your Hubbards. I love Hubbards. And pumpkins, too. Really easy to grow. I still have a ton of pumpkins in my basement. So, when you can put that much food into a basement storage area and know that you'll have it through the winter months, that's a really good thing. So thank you for joining me. We'll be doing this every week for the next 9 weeks. We've got 10 weeks planned, and we're going to cover all kinds of different topics each week. I'll post it on the Thursday, what it is that we're going to be doing, and let you know what you might want to have. And if you want to join in and do things more actively, come on our Zoom line. And if you want to just be here and learn and send some messages over, then that would be great as well. So thank you all for joining. Have a great weekend. Hope you get your gardens planned this weekend and get onto some seed sites and order your seeds. And have a lovely time.